Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, councillors and humans in general, and welcome to tonight's Place and Resources Scrutiny meeting. I hope we're all looking forward to it. We'll crack on with for the record, I am Councillor Nocturin Lacey Clark, the Blandford Forum Ward, and I am the chairman of this meeting this evening. We'll start with item 1 on the agenda, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Rory Major, Councillor David Took and Councillor Sarah Williams. Everybody else looks to be present and in their seats, so thank you to those that did manage to make it for coming. We'll then do item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of March 2025. Is everybody happy that I take sign these minutes as a true and accurate record of what then took place? No one is dissenting. Fantastic. Thank you. I will sign those after the meeting. We did have some actions. We want to start putting the review of actions from the minutes that have then come out. We have a few updates. We asked to receive the full PwC business case, and that has been sent to all members of the committee, and I believe all councillors as well. So thank you very much. That's done. We can take that off the actions. We asked the Cabinet Member for Transformation to clarify the details around the decision to instruct PwC, and that has come out. It was it was included within the bulk of the material at section 2.17, and it is that it was a purely officer decision to bring in PwC to do it. It wasn't made by any political person or party. Action 3 was the Cabinet Member for Transformation to confirm what decision was made to abolish the performance boards, previously run by Councillor Haynes. The Performance and Transformation Board was an informal meeting held by the previous administration to brief Cabinet members and lead members on progress with performance and transformation. It was naturally discontinued at the end of the administration. That was an officer decision, with officers then seeking guidance from the new administration, led by Nick as our portfolio holder and leader, on how they wish to brief and oversee performance. As the new administration does not have lead members, they use their informal cabinet meetings to do this, which then feed into scrutiny to oversee such matters. That comment slightly confused me because obviously there's no feedback whatsoever from informal cabinet meetings to scrutiny, but presumably that is what they intend to do in the future, maybe. Item 4, we asked for the full 40-year term projections on the MRP changes. We were promised these before full council, and I apologise that we didn't receive them before full council. We still haven't received them. It was stated that they exist and they have them at full council, but they haven't been sent them. So that will be on here again next meeting. Hopefully we would have received that by then. Excellent, so that confirms the minutes. We will now move to item 3, declarations of interest. Does any councillor in the room have a declaration of interest that isn't already in their pecuniaries they want to disclose? No, fantastic. Jonathan can breathe a sigh of relief. If anything does come up in the meeting, please do just say when it does. Item 4, public participation. No questions received from the public. Item number 5, questions from councillors. No questions received from councillors. It would be nice if councillors do have something they would like scrutiny to have a bit of a think about. Please do ask a question leading to it within this committee, and we would very happily take it. Item 6, which is kind of one half of the meat of the agenda, which is the dockless bike rental in South East Dorset. So, presenting on this will be Christopher Whitehouse. Are you going to run us through a quick presentation, Chris, to speak on it? Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to run you through a quick presentation, if you'll bear with me whilst I just share my screen. So by way of introduction, I was the project manager who worked on the implementation of this scheme, and I currently lead the team that actually runs the bike share schemes that we have remaining in Dorset, and I'm part of transport planning. So for the uninitiated, what we're talking about here, it is pretty much what it says on the tin, bike rental scheme. This scheme ran in South East Dorset. It was set up in the Wimborne, Ferndown, Coal Hill, Westmoors and West Parley area of the county. If you don't know what these schemes are, the basic premise is that riders, anybody can sign up to them. You use a phone app generally. And then bikes are distributed throughout the area, and you pick up the bike from a bay, go out, ride it, rent it by the minute, and then bring it back to another bay or the bay where you set off from. So it's a pretty basic concept. Bike share schemes of this nature are fairly common around the country. What I will do is just run through our scheme and the process that we went through to procure it, to set it up, and then finally what resulted in its termination. So the scheme was basically procured on the back of a scheme that already existed, a much larger scheme that runs in the BCP council area. And so that was already up and running. It was well established and working. As I've said, covered the southeast area of Dorset. It was all under a concession contract, which was signed in January 2022, and then the scheme was finally launched and went live with riders in August 2022. The scheme that we purchased, so this was we invested capital in 122 pedal bikes. And also established 47 bays in the area where the bikes could be picked up or dropped off. And this also included a couple of what we would call parklets. So these are landscaped bays with planters and also signage. Capital funding that was used to set up, excuse me, it came from. So there was £240,000 capital funding from the Community Infrastructure Levy and £23,000 that was used from the Transforming Cities Fund. It's also important to mention that Beryl Bikes also contributed throughout the scheme at least 224 revenue investment in terms of sort of setup and operation and management of the scheme during its life cycle. In 2023, we expanded the scheme slightly into Upton and Corfe Mullen, and to do that, we introduced 80 bikes, electric bikes, which were spread across the whole area. So the distribution of these was shared across into to Ferndown and the Wimborne area. So the other thing to mention is that whilst Beryl met the revenue and setup costs and the operating costs, the idea of the scheme was that Beryl would receive the revenue less a 5% profit share that would come back to the council. So the initiation stage, the setup for it, there was a business case that went to was approved by the Community Infrastructure Levy Funding Committee and then went on for final approval back in January 2021. 400,000 was requested, but 240,000 approved. There was at the time, this risk was identified, which does have some relevance to the current scheme, that the sparsity of population in the area might lead to underutilization of the bikes, but actually with planning and analysis of the demand, we would put the bays and set up the scheme to cover the area where there was highest demand. It's all operated under a concession model, and the reason for this is that, or one of the reasons is that the risk would sit with Beryl or the operator and not Dorset Council. We got an exemption for this, which meant that we could make a direct award. And it made sense that for customer convenience, the fact that we were next door to a large scheme, it meant that also we could share resource with BCP Council, and that was very key to all of this. So they had a maintenance depot there, a lot, and obviously staff and other facilities that are needed to operate such a scheme. One of the things it's important to mention, I think, is that at the time, in hindsight, we realised that Beryl's assessment model didn't consider sort of demographics beyond population size. The diagram that is on the slide illustrates their typical ridership age breakdown. You can see from that the majority of users are actually under age 55. Children can't use the bikes, are not supposed to use the bikes. So it's only open to adults. And yes, those of you who know the area will know that that age breakdown is slightly inverse to the population. There's more older people over the age of 55, so compared to this age breakdown, this demographic. So in terms of the contract, so it was a concession contract, and concession contracts must have, they must be time limited. There must be an end date to them. And we use the same format of contract that was used by BCP when they set up theirs. And actually, our contract length was aligned to the BCP Council one. And this part of the reason for that was that it did reduce the risk. If BCP's contract, when that ended, if they decided not to renew it for any reason, then it would have left our scheme sort of stranded. And so that was one of the reasons for the 3-year contract with a contract with a 3-year break point. So there was an option to extend the contract after those 3 years if both parties agreed. And it's also worth mentioning that it did take 6 months to actually mobilise the scheme from the initial contract from the initial contract signing to when the actual whole scheme went live. And that was because we were really keen to get the scheme right, get the bays in the right places, and engage with the local communities to make sure that they had input into all of that. But the downside of that is that it did take time. So why did Beryl Bikes withdraw the service? So at the 3-year break point, which was in November, or in January, sorry, of 2025, at that break point, Beryl made the decision to end the scheme. And the reasons for that were really lower than expected ridership, but also they were incurring fairly high operating costs with lots of bays spread across the area. It was fairly high maintenance. Usage was not as good as was expected, not helped by a few wetter than average years, which doesn't encourage this sort of activity, and of course inflationary pressure that is that we've been all been prey to over the last few years. Beryl did offer to continue the service, but only if a revenue subsidy could be found to operate, and that's a fairly common feature of a lot of these bike share schemes, especially pedal bikes. The table that you see on the right of the slide there illustrates the ridership levels, the rides per asset or bike per day, and you can see there that in the Southeast Dorset scheme, the ridership is really very low compared to other areas in Dorset and the BCP area. Don't know why this isn't moving on. Right. So in terms of the contract end and the whole exit, the decision to terminate the contract at that point in time did come slightly out of the blue. Obviously, we knew the contract was up, coming to its end, but I think it's fair to say that we were expecting Beryl to extend it, because that was certainly what we would have liked to have done. On reflection, we could have perhaps engaged with members sooner. So we got the news about the fact that they wanted to terminate the contract at the end of November, but it was not until the beginning of January that we contacted members to let them, local members, to let them know that the scheme wasn't operating. And the reason for that was that we were trying to seek solutions with Beryl, and also the fact that it was over the Christmas period. There wasn't a contingency plan in place. We hold our hands up to that. And perhaps there could have been, but like I say, this did sort of catch us slightly by surprise. We were offered the chance of continuing the scheme if the revenue costs could be met, but it's worth pointing out that those revenue costs that were pitched to us were £14,000 per month. Which, given the current fiscal challenges faced by the authority, the decision was made that this wasn't a figure that we could meet. The exit strategy, I think, was fairly vague. We didn't really have a plan from Beryl exactly how they would sort of terminate the scheme. I think that was sort of slightly lacking, but I'm pleased to say that since the scheme has terminated, the bikes have actually been redistributed, and 2 of the parklets have been moved to the South Dorset scheme, so have been put to good use, and it's also worth pointing out that the bays were removed at Beryl's expense. The graph that you can see there, it's really just to sort of illustrate the fact that the orange bars are the South Dorset scheme. It just gives an idea of how low the ridership was in the southeast in comparison to the South Dorset scheme. I think it's just worth making that comparison. And then in terms of, we have addressed, we haven't sat on our laurels. We have addressed a number of issues that we think have come out of this. I won't go into any detail with these, but needless to say, we have taken this as a learning experience and tried to improve on what we've got there, what we've got in place at the moment. And again, I'm not going to go through these slides in any these points in any great detail, but I think it's important to emphasise that with all the infrastructure work that has gone on to improve active travel, particularly cycling, over in the east of the county, this scheme was only a very small element of that, and actually the scheme is still getting use. It's been very welcomed, and there's some there's figures there and we that highlight those benefits. And that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Chris. I don't think anyone's ever querying the benefits of active travel at all, so thank you for that, but I think we're all in agreement on that. I'm just going to push back on one thing before we open to questions. You said that good news that the bikes have been redistributed to other schemes. Yeah. Another way of saying the same thing would be a company that let us down and pulled out. We then gave them the assets we paid for them to make money off in a different area. Is another way of saying the same thing, because those were the bikes that we bought and we've allowed the company to then move them and keep using them elsewhere, which has a higher revenue income. So I just want to push back on that as a good news story, because that's not how I see it. It might be how everybody else sees it, but that's the way I'd see it. Open up to questions. I know Ray's got a bunch. Ray, do you want to kick us off, as you do have a number?
Yeah, Councillor Ray Bryan, the previous portfolio holder that was responsible for introducing these bikes. So to say I'm unhappy is a slight understatement, which means that I will now dig in very deep to find out how we got to this stage. I'm the member for St Leonard's and St Ives, which is one of the areas in the east that wasn't included, although we did on several occasions ask that Verwood would be included, but Beryl didn't seem to want to do that. Right, question number one. Did procurement get involved in the contract?
Yes, they were involved right from the beginning, and we went through a process of, they were very supportive with the exemption that we got. So the exemption allowed us to piggyback on the BCP contract, but procurement were involved right from the start, yes.
Right. Did legal get involved?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of these will have fairly short answers, but you'll see which way I'm going. Did we check the viability of the company before we signed up to them?
Yes, we did. And obviously BCP as well will have, did their due diligence in terms of, Beryl's viability.
Were we reliant on BCP's version on this, or did we do our own check on the viability? Simple question.
We didn't do a separate check at the time, no.
Right. Anywhere in the contract was it stated that if we didn't hit the target, the scheme would be withdrawn? I think you answered that in a roundabout way by saying that it was a 3-year contract that could be withdrawn from any time. I wish I'd known that at the time, let me add, because that would have probably strengthened my wish not to have Beryl bikes in the first place. You are very aware that I was very against the introduction of Beryl bikes, but I went with the officer's recommendation. The decision was taken in November 2024, and yet the members weren't told until 3 months later. That's 3 months of the 6 months that we had on notice. I can't tell you how damaging this has been in the East Dorset area, because people don't understand why this council has spent millions on providing cycleways, and within weeks of us having finished the cycleways, Beryl withdraw the service. If you can imagine how that would appear to residents, they look at it and say, was this a waste of money? And how did we get into this place? And I think we need to learn some lessons. I'm hopeful that John will allow me to have a meeting with him outside of this when we can discuss ways in which we'll never get into this position again. But I am concerned that officers signed off on a project that we hadn't done the complete due diligence ourselves. We relied on BCP, who are a totally separate council, just for the benefit of the public, and yet we use their knowledge because, as you know, there is a situation at the moment where this brings about my thinking. I can't go into it too deep, but I was presented with some figures by one of the members from Ferndown, and I just wonder why we didn't do our own due diligence on such a big contract when we were investing money. You mentioned the fact that there was a discussion on where the bays would be positioned. As you're aware, Beryl didn't stick to that. They moved them. And I'm sure, I can't see whether the councillor is online, but as you know, if we take the Wimborne area, several of the positions that the councillors asked for these to be put in were changed without knowledge to the councillor. Now, considering the flack that the councillors took when we were doing the cycleways, and now we've got a situation where we withdraw the cycle service, you can imagine how upset, and I'll use that word, how upset those councillors are. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm representing them tonight to dig in deep as to how we got into this mess, because it is. You mentioned the fact that we were going to get 5% of their operating costs. Have we got any details on their operating costs?
I think that was 5% of the profit share.
Yeah.
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 No, we've not. We've repeatedly asked Beryl for those, but have never had that level of detail.
Sorry, so we have a contractual agreement that they would give us 5% of the profit costs from it. We've asked that detail, never received it, yet we've chosen to allow them to take over the money-making area for this service. That strikes me, and by money-making area, I mean the Weymouth, Dorset, Portland area. This strikes me as all very confusing. I come from more of a business head, and I think a lot of us do, and we understand that things. I'll take buses. They're a great example. The bus companies are private companies. They run a load of services in rural areas which lose money. They don't make money. They don't even break even. And they do those services, and as a result, they then also have the rights to have the services in the honeypot areas where they actually do make their profit. And that's it's a symbiotic relationship. You take the good and the bad. And that's what we were setting up with Beryl. And for us, one of Ray's lead members at the time that worked very closely with you on this, which I thoroughly enjoyed working with you on. I think it was a fantastic idea. I liked the idea of having mentable bike scheme. I was under the impression that's what was happening here. And that was very much the way I was led to believe it. And now I'm very shocked to hear they've pulled out of that area and just kept the honeypot. And not only have we allowed them to keep the honeypot, we've also then provided them with the cycles that we paid for ourselves, £240,000 of our Dorset Council taxpayers' money to buy those assets. We've given them to use to make more money in the honeypot area they're keeping. That does seem a bit like rewarding bad behaviour on someone that's contractually broken a contract with us by not providing the 5% and the data that you've said you've repeatedly asked for. So could we comment on that? Because that can't be right, surely.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come in, please, if that's okay. My name's Jack Wiltshire. I'm the Corporate Director for Highways and Engineering for Dorset Council. So before we get too far away from a number of points raised there, can I pick up on the first one raised by Councillor Bryan to do with when we were informed by Beryl and when local members were informed? So as Chris highlighted in the presentation, it was somewhat out of the blue, but we were emailed by Beryl on the 28th of November 2024 to let us know that that they were looking to enact the break clause within the contract. As that was out of the blue, Chris and the team looked to find out what that actually meant, what other options potentially were on the table, if Beryl were looking to see if there could be a different system to allow us to continue to use that contract. So once more information was known, the team made me aware as the head of service on the 16th of December 2024, and I then made the cabinet member for place aware. Sorry, I was made aware on the 12th of December. I made the cabinet member aware on the 16th of December. With that coming into the Christmas break, we were still trying to find out exactly what we could say to local members to not cause confusion over a Christmas period and come back with facts. And so the point which we let local members know was the 3rd of January 2025, which then was followed up by a webinar which took place on the 6th of February 2025.
Sorry, before I let you carry on, I'm a bit confused. What facts? Beryl said they were stopping. We didn't agree to continue, so it was stopping. What were the facts that you were trying to find out in that time, aside from that?
The facts that we were trying to find out were what would make it possible to continue to operate the scheme. If we had have had more time, I think we could have worked with local town council, possibly working with the bid to see if there could be a subsidy for the scheme. But the main fact that came forward was that Beryl offered a price at which they would carry out the scheme for on an annual basis, which would then let Dorset Council keep the revenue, but it would be at no risk to Beryl. And the fee which Beryl were looking at there was not something which we had budgeted and not something we were bringing into the budget setting process at that time. So those were facts which we wanted to go to the local members with. I've got thumbs up there, so I'll just carry on with the additional points which are raised. So in terms of the due diligence, as Chris said, it is a bona fide contract. We went through that contract with our legal colleagues and our procurement colleagues. I think the key point which we've identified here was that 12 weeks notice on either side isn't enough time for a local authority to look to procure another alternative supplier. It is simply not enough time to run another procurement process to get someone in so there's a smooth transition. There obviously is a rationale behind 12 weeks, and that is why the contract stated there should be open book accounting, so we should have had far better insights as to how Beryl were performing on the scheme. And Beryl have not shared that information with us, and that continues to be a cause of concern between Dorset Council and Beryl, which we're pushing Beryl on. So a point to identify is that I think in hindsight we would have looked for a longer break clause point to notify termination. Moving on to the point about keeping the honeypot site and the cycles. So I think when we're referring to the honeypot site, we're talking about the Dorchester to Weymouth scheme, which, as Chris showed on the figures, is a viable scheme at the moment. It is viable because Beryl are operating locally in the area and have a BCP contract and have a factory locally and have the vans locally which can move the vehicles around. There was no interest from other suppliers to carry out a bike share scheme in that area, albeit I do recognise that it would appear Beryl are successful in that particular scheme. The vehicles themselves, the bikes do age. All those vehicles are kept outside. They're rained on, knocked over, bumped, those sorts of things. So although the bikes were moved from the South East Dorset scheme to other areas within the scheme, they were predominantly replacing other bikes which were keeping up the original numbers, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I'm going to come back on that very quickly. Michael Samuelson, sorry, we purchased the bikes and we gave them to Beryl. We didn't have a budget set up to repurchase new ones. I believe the agreement was that they would maintain, we would put the forward money in, they would maintain and keep them going. So we should have been returned the same number of maintained bicycles that we first bought, and they should have been, and they can't be replacing broken bicycles if Beryl have a contract to replace the broken bicycles. When we were doing the contracts, that was part of the contract, that we would buy them and they would maintain them and keep them in good working order. As someone that was part of the setting it up, and Chris is nodding with me, that was the case. So they should have been returned at the end of the contract. They should still be in very good working order, and they shouldn't be replacing broken bikes, because there shouldn't be any, because they're contractually obliged to fix them.
Yeah, some bikes will inevitably get damaged beyond repair. They weren't contractually obliged to replace them, but obviously to keep them in good repair. Some of the bikes have been redistributed into the Upton and Corfmullen area where there is the scheme. So we've managed to boost that. I think it's also worth pointing out that residents of Dorset do cycle to and from the BCP area where some of those bikes will inevitably be. So they are enhancing and it being enjoyed by our residents, I would like to think.
So to clarify, we've also supported BCP with our assets, from what you're saying there. We're helping a private company make profit and also support a BCP scheme, which does also benefit some of our residents, but we chose to do that as opposed to giving the bikes away to schools, allowing the bikes to be used for free until they died in Dorchester. Who made that decision on giving away our assets?
I can come out there, Chair. You paint it in a certain light, but it was an officer's decision to say that it would be sensible to redistribute the bicycles to the Corfmullen area of the scheme.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to paint a picture. That's how I see it. I'm just looking here, 122 pedal cycles, which is that's quite a large number that we paid for. And I see that was part of the £240,000. So it isn't like we're just talking one or two bikes. We're talking a considerable amount of actual capital that we've invested in them. And so I'm not trying to paint you in the position. I'm uncomfortable with a policy and a system that allows that to be given to a company. Or do we still own them, but Beryl are using them? Or have we given those to Beryl? I'm uncomfortable there isn't a policy that allows for us to give away assets without it being signed off slightly higher.
We still own those, so we could recall them. Well, I'm actually in some discussions about possibly getting some into the Studland area where the National Trust operate bikes, and so it would help enhance their element of the scheme. But yes, they're to all intents and purposes they're still ours. We haven't given them to Beryl, but as you can imagine, finding a home or finding a use for 120 bikes is not easy. We don't have the storage space, so if there were an opportunity to repurpose those bikes, and then we would be very open to that, I'm sure.
Fantastic, thanks. I'm really happy to hear that we haven't given them away. We do still own them, so we do have that decision-making power still. That's really good and alleviates the real fear I had coming from that, so thank you. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I don't know an awful lot about barrel bikes. I actually thought they were named after Councillor Ezard when I first heard about them. So in terms of replacing bikes in Weymouth and whatnot, I'm a Weymouth councillor. I find it odd that we're discussing this large number of bikes replacing other bikes within the space of, a year, I think it is. I think it's been since the last elections. I have not seen that many damaged. I've seen a few damaged, but not a large number or any damage within a degree that I would regard as no longer being fit for purpose. So I think that is a bit... I'm a bit sceptical that they are being used to replace damaged bikes. I mean, if they were that badly damaged, are they being made out of cardboard? I don't understand that they're that sort of flimsy. Obviously, these are profitable in Weymouth and Dorchester, etc. They're making a profit, I assume. That's why it's referred to as the honeypot in this situation. If that's the case, and we are still in contract with them, is there no mechanism for telling them that we will only continue for them to be allowed to operate within Weymouth if they reinstate the East Dorset scheme, so Ray can get back on his bike?
So I think to tie alongside that, if I could suggest that we can't make decisions on contracts, but we could ask the question of when is the Weymouth contract, the South Dorset, Weymouth, Dorchester, Portland contract up, assuming it's the same 3-year, and is the going forward idea that the two areas are contracted as one going forward, like we have tried to align the leisure centre recontracting over all areas. Is that something we're looking at doing for this one, and when is the contract due for us at the first point we can cut it for the South Dorset side?
Chair, I'll take that one. So it's a 5-year contract for Weymouth from June last year. So we are tied into that contract. In terms of what happens after that, at the moment, we've not explored that with Beryl, but certainly those ideas which you put forward are ones that can be considered.
Thank you. I'll leave that bit for tying up a recommendation. I've got a few notes here which I'll talk about later on. Councillor Ray Bryan.
Yeah, this is obviously difficult because this has come a bit like a bolt out of the blue to me. And you mentioned earlier on the fact that we can, we'd have to find somewhere to store these bikes if we took them back in. Did we approach Moores Valley, who buy bikes every year, as to whether they'd be any good for them?
No, we didn't, but we could. They are not the sort of bikes that would be easily ridden around Moores Valley, but we could certainly pose the question.
I think it's very... Sorry.
Apologies, Chair. If I can come in as a supplementary. One of the things that Chris did highlight at the start was we did ask for more money than we were actually given through the SIL. So we actually purchased fewer bikes than we originally wanted to do. So the redistribution of bikes isn't necessarily an over-provision of bikes within the area. And having those extra bikes is clearly making it better for the users, but there is a greater level of availability. Albeit I do recognise that makes Beryl's life easier because they have to spend less time redistributing bikes because there are naturally more bikes. Thank you.
I don't think I didn't mean to infer that there was an population of bikes. I don't think that's what I was trying to say. The point I was making was that an asset we've paid for, and then the contract ended, and that company no longer wanted to use them for what we wanted for. We are now letting them use at no cost to make their private company more money on assets that we bought as Dorset Council. That's the part I have issue with, not the overpopulation or potential overpopulation of bikes in an area. So to be clear, that was the bit that I had the issue with.
Yeah, one of my big bones of contention when this scheme first came about, being local to the BCP area, I drive through the BCP area on a regular basis, and I was horrified to see how many of the bikes just lie on the ground because people don't use the stand. I noticed the paperwork is headed, get this right, dockless. Having recently spent some time in Southampton, where Beryl used to be, are no longer there, they have a docking scheme that keeps the bikes tidy and doesn't cause the damage that we're seeing. This is something we need to consider going forward, because I'm sure the people in Weymouth don't want to see bikes lying on the ground. It doesn't do the bikes any good, and it doesn't do our image any good as a council. If you go to Southampton, they've got the docks there, the bike goes into the dock and is locked in there, and it remains secure and protected. And I think if we're going to learn some lessons from this, that's one we need to learn. Because, Chris, you're very aware, I was quite vocal when we were discussing this on the fact that you could trip over bikes in BCP, because although they have the areas for them to be put, they don't always end up there. They can be several hundred yards away and are obviously then transported back into the bays by Beryl. I am still very concerned that we're not getting the paperwork that you have requested, quite rightfully, because you obviously knew you were going to face us tonight, and I don't blame you for doing your best to get the information. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is what legal pressure we can put on them to perform as per the contract. Because I am very concerned that the next time we'll be discussing this is when another area doesn't reach the level that Beryl see as their area or their levels, and they'll be withdrawing those as well. I keep going back to the fact that I'm horrified that they withdrew the scheme within weeks, not months, not years, within weeks of us having finished the cycleways. I find their decision absolutely appalling. And I really am concerned that we're still progressing with them without seeking an alternative supplier. And one of the things that I think, if I may, Chairman, we need to look at is making sure that when we have a situation like this, we have a plan B. Because we went into this without a plan B. And there are other areas that aren't for discussion tonight, so I can't raise them, but there are other areas I'm equally concerned about that we've got into contracts and we're not seeing the returns that we envisaged. 5% is a minimal amount, and in hindsight, it's a lovely thing to have. We should have tied this up a lot better, which is why I asked the question originally, were procurement involved, were legal involved, because this is a council joint issue.
Learning opportunity.
Yeah, we'll leave it as a learning opportunity, but I'm fairly sure that both Aidan Dunn and Jonathan Mayer are listening quite closely to this conversation and thinking, yeah, we may have been able to do better. I'm not going to be super critical of the officers, because I don't think they deserve that, but I will be super critical of Beryl for leaving us with such a short term to get something reorganised. And I'm fairly sure amongst my colleagues here that if it was happening in their area, they'd also feel a bit sort of upset over it. The bit that I'm more concerned about is we're very much into active travel. And what have we done? We've taken one of the most, the easy part of active travel is to get people on bikes. It gets them off the roads, it gets them out of the cars, it saves on carbon emissions, and this has now gone away from the people of East Dorset. Chris, you raised earlier on that a lot of people, and I'm going to use the Ferndown Industrial Estate as an area, a lot of people used to use Beryl to ride from Bournemouth to Ferndown. We installed extra cycleways at our cost to get them onto the Ferndown Industrial Estate. Because if you recall, the Ringwood Road and the Wimborne Road is the one I'm talking about, that's the access to the industrial estate, but there was nowhere for them to go from there to get onto the industrial estate. So we invested money into providing that specialist cycleway for no reason now, because nobody can use it. Yes.
And to bring us back on track slightly, I think that's a different thing, and actually I think it's worth looking at the maybe at a future meeting, the efficacy of the cycle lanes and the impact they've had, because they can still be used by anybody that rides their own bike and everything else. Just bring us back on a little bit. And what do you think of the next point? Can I go to Louis and then come back to you?
Yeah.
Yep, Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, I just got a challenge, Councillor Bryan. I don't agree that we are here to promote a certain form of transportation. I think it is down to individuals to transport however they see fit as private, free citizens in a country. And I think what this proves is we have to be very sceptical about using taxpayer money and the power of the council to actually try and force a mode of transport on people. It's used by a very small minority of people. Most people still do use the car and will continue to use the car. I'd like to see you do the school run in a weekly big shop on the back of a barrel bike.
And Councillor Brendan, would you like to come to disagree with that?
Anyway, yeah. Not exactly, but sideways. My patch is Upton, mostly, and the barrel bikes have extended into Upton, which was very welcome because an awful lot of people in Upton work in Poole, and actually they can access the cycleway that goes around the edge of Holes Bay and can cycle in quite comfortably. And in fact, before barrel bikes did extend to Upton, we used to find that they would pick up a bike in Poole, and particularly the e-bikes stop working once you go over the roundabout. So we would find them dumped in the roundabout, and then they'd walk the next 150 yards back home. So it's quite good that the two are joined together, and I want to be a bit more partnership-minded. I know BCP is a different council, but transport extends beyond boundaries. People in Upton work in Poole, people in Poole work in Ferndown. So we shouldn't be too parochial about where they go. But I am concerned that on that chart, that the number of rides per day for East Dorset was classed as unsustainable at 0.4 or something, whereas in Upton it was 0.6. It's not a hell of a lot of difference. So what's the next step? Are we looking at a situation where barrel bikes might say, we don't care about Upton and Corfmullen anymore? And I can sort of understand, because Corfmullen's up a hill, so perhaps not so many people go up. That I can imagine quite a lot come down. So I can imagine the little guys are having to take the bikes back up to the top of the hill occasionally. Fair enough. But we shouldn't be parochial about boundaries, even though I know there are different statutory organisations and different finances. So that's my first point. Please don't go, well, that's BCP, it's nothing to do with us, and concentrate on Dorchester and Weymouth because they're seen as good guys. But also, I wanted to ask, this came as a news flash. It came as it came to councillors, and then it went live onto Bournemouth Echo and Facebook and all the rest of them, that barrel bikes had stopped. Fair enough. Were the transport action groups informed, asked for their opinions, asked if they had any suggestions about where to go? Or are we being very top-down and saying, well, we'll talk to National Trust. We won't talk to the organisations on the ground that are working hard. All right, they're all volunteers, and sometimes you think it's a bit of a talking shop because they don't believe that Dorset actually backs active travel. And in fact, the issue at last night's, was it only last night, Perfect Action Group was, is there actually an active travel strategy in Dorset Council? Because they don't know it. So if the Transport Action Groups, the PTAGs, etc., don't know that we've got an active travel strategy, have we? If we have, why isn't it more widespread? So my question is, who else did you consult as to about where they should go? Did you actually ask the PTAG? Because we've got the whole Norden Park and Ride situation down at Corfe Castle, where we want to revamp that and make it more lively and exciting. And yes, I know you can hire privately, but if we had barrel bikes there, that would be quite handy. Though admittedly, I don't fancy riding a barrel bike across the sandy paths down to Studland because they're pretty hefty, chunky jobs. But I think we are missing a strategy.
So I'm going to come back on a couple of things. I've got a few people waiting to speak. I think Ray wants to clarify one point shortly. So I'll let Ray really quickly clarify a point, then I've got a couple of bits.
My reference to BCP was over the due diligence side. Did we do our own? It wasn't meaning to offend our colleagues in BCP, far from it. But if we're going to do the job properly, then we need to do our own due diligence. Then we judged on our own results. So that's purely the reference to BCP. And the only other reference I made was that people travel from BCP to Ferndown. And you're right, under the way it works, as soon as you get to the boundary of BCP, the battery turns off. And we had this with scooters. I was the one that made sure that the scooters didn't come into the Dorset Council area. I will still fight that tooth and nail, and I'm pleased to see that we're now starting to see some facts coming out on scooters. But as I say, the reference to BCP was not meant to cause them any problems, just that I do feel that we need to be in control of our own destiny. We're a big council with lots of people.
And just to add to it, I think it's really worth noting that as much as this seems, again, as quite often scrutiny can seem very negative, there's a couple of positives here. So the exemption we got for procurement for it and to work with Beryl was because they were operating in BCP, and we wanted that continuation of service across, because the differential between BCP and Dorset Council exists in our minds. Most residents, they don't care less, and we want them to be seamless over there. So that is something that I know the team have done very well on. Your points on the discussing with the tags and the active transport plan and discussion of what do you do with the bikes, I think I can go ahead and say that didn't happen. But however, we have already heard that we still own the assets, and that is something that the team are happy to look into in the future with what to do with them. I think what you highlighted there that really struck me was the active travel plans, and then groups not feeling like they're involved in that. So maybe that's something that we could revisit in the forward plan part of this meeting, because obviously that's not what we're looking at now, but I think that's something we could look at then. Would that be happy with that? I'm also aware that we have a couple of people online with their hands up. I have messaged Shane to ask what it was about. I haven't got a message back because I can't hear when people speak online, and we did test this last time and it did not work. And I've been very clear that if you have to speak, you want to speak, you need to be in the room. But if Shane can put it as a message to us somehow, then I'm happy to read it on his behalf. But I have been really clear on this. We offer an exception for one person and not everybody. So I hope that everyone understands why we're doing it that way. So, anybody else have any more questions on this? Oh, sorry, Jack wants to come back, and then I have two other hands up. I have Craig and Belinda.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add some additional information on the question about the active travel strategy, that's actually coming to overview in July. So, basically in train. And joined up with that, we're currently out to consultation for our next local transport plan, for which sustainable travel options are certainly embedded within that. And also to pick up on Councillor Leary's point there, we're absolutely not about forcing people out of cars. What we want to do in terms of promoting sustainable travel options is to enable people to have to feel that they can take other options which are sustainable, and feel confident about that and feel safe about doing that. And that's certainly some of the feedback we've had from the Transforming Cities Fund in South East Dorset, that previously people felt that they wouldn't ride a bike without the level of provision we've got at the moment. So that's why we have seen more people deciding to make those active travel choices rather than having sort of a policy against car drivers. Thank you.
Super. I've got 3 people on the list now, so I'll go to Craig next.
Thank you, Chair. You can call me Craig, it's fine. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Craig Monks, Bedminster Ward. I've got 2 questions that may be simplistic in their nature, but I obviously wasn't part of the process historically, so it might be silly questions to some members. But one of the concerns I have from the debate so far is it feels like one of the issues that we've had as a council is a lack of control, or not being sort of treated as an equal in the relationship with Beryl. And I think that's had a knock-on effect. So my first question, and it's a fairly open question to give officers an opportunity to maybe elaborate slightly, is on hindsight, would we consider that to be a failure of the agreement we had with Beryl, or the contract, or is that more of a failure of communication with the company? And in particular, an example that I think the chair picked up on earlier in the debate, the cancellation of some of the services within kind of weeks of implementing them. To me, that seems like something that simplistically we shouldn't have allowed to have happened. Another example was buses. We know that you need to run a bus service for a year to see whether it's really viable or not. So for the partner to tell us they're cancelling that service within weeks and for no mechanism or recourse to be there, that's why I asked the question, was it a failure of, do we feel that it was a failure of contract or communication as a council? I hope that makes sense.
Craig, you're a start. There's one slight point of clarity I'm going to pop in for you, then I will pass over. The scheme that was finished weeks before was the improvement to the cycleways, not any part of the contract with Beryl. So that they are, it's a scheme that would help increase the usage, we would hope, and make it easier and promote it, but it was a separate scheme. Just a point of clarity, but then I'll hand over for the answer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and to pick up on that particular question in terms of the performance of the contract, we do feel that Beryl could have performed better in terms of their financial transparency as part of the contract. And bearing in mind, we have a relationship with Beryl, and Beryl are represented on the call at the moment. Beryl have put in place an action plan to improve that financial transparency, which we are awaiting to see.
And I think after 3 years of not producing the financial transparency, let's hope that can change soon. That'll be excellent. Craig, are you happy with that as the answer?
I am, and thank you for the clarity on my first question, but I'd like to just come back to that. So I appreciate the cycle paths, or cycle lanes were a different thing, but I think my point may still be relevant in the timing. So if the Beryl bikes were withdrawn within weeks of the new cycle lanes being built, which can be used by other bikes as well, I think the relevance of the timing is, so I would have pushed back on that and said, well, maybe run it 6 more months because we've just opened these cycle lanes. So anyway, I'll push that back. I know I'm getting an answer to my question, but I'll go back to the officer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I confirm that that message was relayed to Beryl loud and clear, and also in particular during the local members webinar, which took place on, forgive me if I haven't got it exactly, but on the end of February. Sorry, I haven't got the exact date, but the tail end of February, when we had the members webinar and the CEO of Beryl was on the call, we made it abundantly clear that it seemed to be a very poor time to terminate the contract when the full connectivity of the Transforming Cities Fund's cycleways in South East Dorset had only just come online. However, Beryl did continue to exercise their contractual rights to terminate at the first available opportunity.
So I have now received an email from Councillor Bartlett. He hasn't got a question, but as a ward member in that place, in one of the places that has lost this, he would like to pass some observations. There's no question, and it shouldn't affect the debate. So the fact that we can't hear it, I think he would like it on the record. And he's not here because he has a really bad illness. And so in this situation, as I don't think us hearing it is a requisite for it, I will allow him to speak from online, but there won't be a response because it's not fair if not everybody can hear it. But Councillor Bartlett, are you happy to then speak online?
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear your voice coming through the speakers. I just can't work out what you're saying.
Okay. The history of this is that the 2014 adopted local plan meant that the employment area was going to be Ferndown Industrial Estate, and that was the intention. So that cycleway was critical to enable that movement of a working populace from Wimborne over to the Ferndown Industrial Estate. The fact that Beryl Bikes have decided to pull out of that now is going to put increased pressure on the Catford Bottom roundabout. I feel really sorry for the previous cabinet member for highways and transport and the present one, and obviously all the ward members that have been wrapped up in this in the office and tried to do it. My disappointment is that the work wasn't done to ensure that we'd done our due diligence around the financial aspects of Beryl Bikes. We thought we were getting into bed with someone that had a green agenda, wanted to deliver a different way of that travel mode that would also enable us reducing our carbon emissions. And I think, in hindsight, being a wonderful thing, I think that as a council authority, we need to be mindful that going forward, where private companies know that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions, we're trying to work to that green agenda, that we don't become a soft touch for that private aspect of the bigger world, the bigger market. So I think it's hugely disappointing that Beryl Bikes have behaved in the manner in which they have. I don't think ethically they've behaved in a manner in which I would expect them to do and what we were expecting to be the final results around. So I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. I actually got probably a good 40% of what you said then. You actually, as always, are very eloquent and actually clearly spoken. And so thank you. I think it's really useful to hear the views of a ward member, and I think you're agreeing with a lot of things that we were thinking here. The next question is from Councillor Belinda Bowden.
Thanks. Belinda Borden, Lyme Regis and Charmouth. Is it okay because I'm not a committee member?
Sorry, I take it quite easy going. There's only a few of us in here. I'm very happy to let non-committee members speak at the same time as us, rather than having, two different sets of it. Let's all just go together, work as a team as we should.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm interested in whether or not there was a proper exploration of whether there were any other models of doing it, because obviously with Beryl already being in BCP, it sort of seemed obvious. But over in I was working on this for ages in Lyme, but I was working with co-bikes and talking to Chris about it at the time, because they did have the docking model, so that there wasn't the issue of the bikes being left higgledy-piggledy. The issue with us was lack of grid capacity, and there was a huge upfront expense to providing the docking stations, which was probably beyond us anyway. But we were talking about an electric car sharing club and various things at the time. They had contracts with East Devon District Council, with some of the Somerset councils, and with South West Trains. So it made a huge amount of sense. But I'm just curious to know whether there is any other operators that they went bust. So it's just as well we didn't get into any arrangements. So I'm curious to know whether there are, Councillor Bryan's mentioned Southampton, whether there are models of other people that can make money out of bike rental schemes, and have they been explored? And if so, we'd love them in West Dorset, even though we don't have the infrastructure, because people do want to find other ways of getting about.
It's one of those unique situations where I can speak firsthand in the fact that there were other models that were looked at a very high level, not detail, but high level. But because of the potential of bringing it over the border from BCP and that cross travel, at the time, this made by far the best sense. And I think the efficacy of that decision making was the reason we got the special rules. We didn't have to follow the normal procurement exemption. So we didn't have to follow the normal procurement process. And I think what you're saying there is in the future, when something seems like it's a really obvious decision, actually we could do some further detailed look. I think that's kind of the suggestion coming from there, but I will pass it over to Jack to respond before I go to.
Chair, I haven't got very much to add, merely to say that particularly BCP, when we're looking to expand to Christchurch, carried out a full exercise. Although there were other suppliers that were interested, none of them passed the quality criteria. Going a bit further in terms of other suppliers, yes, obviously there's lots of other dockless and docked bike suppliers which operate. Southampton in particular are an interesting example which we're keeping an eye on, because Southampton initially started with Beryl and have now transferred to Dot as being their supplier both for e-bikes and for e-scooters, which is a notable case study. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy with that?
I'm just wondering whether there are options, and I definitely take Councillor Brenton's point about the tags being involved and also working with the railway. I mean, it's the connectivity that's key to this, because if, say, for example, in West Dorset, if we had the Axminster and Crewkerne and Honiton stations with the docking stations, and that would then seriously, with the visitor traffic, could get quite a few cars off the road. And as far as we're concerned in West Dorset, it feels like it's the only option.
I'm sorry, I'm put us back onto it, because we're scrutinising the contract with this particular contract. I think that's a really good point to bring to when we look at active travel and active transport. And I think at that point, absolutely, but we're going to bring us back to this contract. I have two other people to speak, so I'm going to go Councillor Leary first.
Yeah, it's quite a simple question to begin with, is what is the actual cost to the taxpayer in regard to the withdrawal of the Beryl scheme from East Dorset? I'd like to come back.
I will let Jack come in on it. I think I know the answer. I'll let Jack say.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's going back to the model that we operated, but we wanted to have zero risk of revenue to Dorset Council, so i.e. to the taxpayer, hence why it was Dorset Council which put capital up front, and then the revenue, cost and liability sat entirely with Beryl. So there is no cost to the taxpayer for the cessation of that part of the scheme.
Except for the moving and disposal of bikes and the choice to what we do with the parklets, I think they were called, because Beryl paid to remove the other parts, if I'm reading the report correctly, but the parklets weren't removed. So I guess there's a potential cost there, but we also reuse rather than it being a cost to the council. Would that be correct, Chris?
No, the parklets were moved at Beryl's expense. So, yes, there was no cost to the authority and the bikes as well.
Fantastic. So no cost to the authority for that. Councillor O'Leary, you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get this clarified in my head. So this is a private company that was engaged in a contract, or is in somewhat still engaged in a contract with us over the allocation of bikes across the county, withdrew a service from a section of the county that wasn't profitable, but did so not at any cost to us. I'm a bit sorry, but I don't actually see, therefore, what the issue is in my opinion. It's a choice by a private company that's not been subsidised by us to withdraw a service. It isn't profitable. Question I would like to see is there have we had a massive influx of opposition from residents saying bring back our bikes, etc. Or because I'm saying if there was that, then there would have been the demand. we operate in a demand-led economy. Reason they work in Weymouth is there's a demand due to population. 8% of the country cycle. A large part of that's in urban areas because that is just the way the world is geography. I wouldn't want to cycle around Lyme Regis. There's too many hills. So electric bikes, yeah, you cycle the easy bit and you put the electric on for the lazy bit, yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor, you make a good point there. I think what we're scrutinising is not the fact it hasn't cost us any money because they're leaving. It's the fact that we put £240,000 into it 3 years ago. So, it was a 3-year contract, and we put £240,000 to run it for 3 years. And I think that's the part that we're looking at, is that good value for the Dorset taxpayer, even though it costs us no extra. Please do come back, Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, sorry, that's the question I'm trying to get at is, are we actually out of pocket from that money, from the 240 grand? Has that money come back to us in any way? So therefore, aren't we surely then £245,000 out of pocket? Yeah, so
Sorry.
You cut me off. When I asked the question is, what did this cost the taxpayer? And surely it's £245,000.
So the scheme cost £240,000 is what we put in towards it. Them leaving and cancelling it after the 3 years has cost us nothing extra on top of that £240,000.
Is that because they continue to operate in Weymouth, in Dorchester? It hasn't cost us any money. If they withdrew the whole scheme, say they went the whole place the whole time, they left Weymouth at the same time, then that would have cost us 240 grand, would it not? It's just the fact they're continuing the scheme in one form or another, that it's not. Yeah.
Yes, obviously it is indeed two separate schemes. But for just to be absolutely down the line clear, the money, the 240,000 we're talking about, was from community infrastructure levy rather than council tax. Yes, it is obviously still money, but it wasn't directly taxpayer money.
Assuming that none of the people that paid that planning application money were taxpayers? Council taxpayers? It's not council tax money, but it is tax. Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Leary?
Yeah, sorry, I think we're here to scrutinise public money. Sorry, I shouldn't use taxpayer money, it's public money. So the bit I'm really trying to get on is we spent £245,000. What did we get for the £245,000?
3 years of them running an active travel scheme with these bikes in those areas, and now we still own about 100 plus of the bikes, but the scheme has stopped happening. That is what we have spent £240,000 on. Oh, but the Corfe Mullen part is still running, and Upton, yeah.
Yeah, Bill Pope would be on to me if I forget Upton. Yeah, I can imagine he didn't. So we paid 245 grand for some bikes that are now operating in another area that isn't under this scheme. Am I correct in saying that? Is that the correct thing to say? Or partly they're operating in that area? We paid £245,000 for bikes to operate in East Dorset. The bikes have now been taken off to BCP, Weymouth, Dorchester, Corfe Mullen and Upton.
Just Upton, Corfe Mullen and BCP, according to the report, is where those bikes have gone. That's what the report states.
And may I come back again? I thought we said that some of those bikes were then used to replenish stock in other areas, such as Weymouth and Portland, where bikes had been broken or were in need of repair. That's what I was led to believe earlier. We weren't told how many. It could be 5. It could be all of 80% of them. But
I probably share that. That's a point of clarity on my point. I intended to say the Corfe Mullen and surrounding area scheme.
So there was a slight miscommunication. The assets that we purchased were redistributed to the BCP, Corfe Mullen and Upton area. They are not being redistributed to the South Dorset area. That's correct? Yeah. Sorry, I saw a shaking head, so I want to double check. And so that is correct. And that area is a totally different contract, which is for 5 years with Beryl and not what we're scrutinising today. But yes.
So basically, we paid 240 grand for some bikes that are now operating not in the East Dorset areas they're indicated, which is why I would see why members from East Dorset are angry and said they've been moved down what is technically is south of the east, south of Westmoors. So therefore, we paid 240 grand for some bikes that aren't actually now operating in the area we paid for them to operate in.
Yeah, not entirely in the area. Absolutely, yes, that is accurate. But I didn't see a question there, so I'm going to pass over. Please do come on in.
Thank you very much. Duncan Surrey House, Corfe Mullen Ward. I'm grateful to the chairman for opening this up beyond the committee. I find myself with a very unusual sensation this evening of agreeing with Louis, particularly with regards to the private company's choice. As far as I can see, that this was a contractual agreement. There was no moral obligation upon the company. They had an option for a contractual break at 3 years, and that's exactly what they did. I have to say, being Corfe Mullen ward member, I don't recognise a huge influx of bikes into Corfe Mullen. We were very well stocked with bikes previously, and the bays, moreover, were painted to accommodate the bikes that we received. We don't have an overspill of bikes in our bays. It was stated this afternoon, and this concerned me in the webinar as well, that an option that was suggested this evening by the officer and discussed with Beryl during the webinar was that possibly parish and town councils could be explored. Now, I could address you, Chairman, Mr. Mayor, this evening, so you feel my pain. You know, we both manage balanced budgets, and were this data-driven, as we understand from Beryl that it was, I would not be asking my precept payers to be subsidising a failing business. That would be tantamount to double taxation. Of course, in the area, we do see people using our cycleways, and they weren't constructed specifically for rental bikes. So when we look across Ferndown, Wimborne, and that area, it is more fortunate than other parts of Dorset, and it may well be that people have hired a bike and thought, well, this is good, but I'm not paying a premium for it every time I want to use one. I'll buy my own bike. So in the same way that Councillor Bryan will be, very familiar with running road traffic surveys, I would say we're fundamentally missing a point here if we are to rely upon our own scrutiny of the viability of a scheme. Are we monitoring traffic use on our cycleways? Are we comparing that with the data of those bicycles which are for hire? Because it could well be that we have good use of those cycleways. People are just choosing not to hire them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really good point. I think that's something we take. I didn't hear questions there, but I heard some really good suggestions, which I'll wrap into here. So thank you so much. I've got two more people, then we're going to wrap it up, I think. So it's had a good hearing. I'm hoping there's some questions here. There may not be. It might be just points and suggestions now. Councillor Bryan.
There is a question which I'll get out straight away. Of the bikes that were positioned in East Dorset, what was the percentage of e-bikes? What was the percentage of what I call manual pedal bikes? Do we have that information?
Not precisely, but we could find it out. We know from the data that we get on either a weekly basis or a monthly basis from Beryl that actually mostly e-bikes are used rather than pedal bikes. But I don't know if that's a reflection of the bikes that are actually out there or were out there on the field. But yes, those 80 bikes that were purchased when we expanded the scheme into Upton and Corfe Mullen, so those 80 e-bikes, some of them would have been spread across into the East Dorset area. The bikes don't stay where they where they originate, as you'll appreciate, people ride them into BCP area and vice versa. So there's quite a mix, and e-bikes are proving much more popular, and that's why we've set up an e-bike only scheme in the Weymouth, Portland and Dorchester area.
Yeah, I think your report shows that most of the bikes in East Dorset area were pedal bikes, not electric. And I think, again, that shows the difference between the schemes. If you've still got a pedal bikes are quite cheap to buy, whereas e-bikes are a lot more expensive to buy. And I think that's relevant to this decision that's been made, which I still think is the wrong decision. Last question, Chris, and I promise I'll be quiet now. Are we now talking to other companies about bringing in different schemes? Because East Dorset still has a void. We've got fantastic cycleways. We need to be talking to a different company. Or, of course, Beryl could, if they wanted to, rescind their decision and bring them back, as long as they're e-bikes, because that'll be a better judgment.
With your permission, can I roll that into a suggestion for the rather than a question? Because there's a suggestion which I can roll that into this one very well. I've kept a bit of a list of points that have come up to put forward. Louis, sorry, did you have another? No, okay, cool. So to tie it up, please, this is for members of the committee now to let me know if I've got the right ideas and if you think this is correct. I've got some outcomes from this because our job here is to add value. And I think one of the things we can straight away say is do our own due diligence. Don't rely on somebody else's, because in this situation, we use somebody else's due diligence. Is everyone happy? Can we have that? Yeah? No one's disagreeing. So are you happy to note that one, Anthony? That's suggestion one. The next one, now I could be miles off on this, so please do challenge, is I think, as we have with a lot of our services in Dorset, we procure the whole area as one. And that's what we're doing for our leisure centres and what we have done previously on areas with buses, so that the areas that are less profitable work with the areas that are more profitable. So I would suggest that we look at in the future harmonising the ends of contracts, and so we can roll the areas together as one procurement covering the whole of the Dorset area that wants to have these active travel options, rather than it being piecemealed out, because that was kind of the goal that we were working on towards with Beryl, and then Beryl pulled out of one area, which now it's quite hard for us to fill in when the three sides of it are covered by a different operator. So I think even if that operator could still continue to be Beryl, I think we should look at procuring as a whole, as a recommendation for it to be considered. Obviously, we can't dictate that this happens, but for a recommendation to go forward. Does everyone think I'm completely wrong on that? We don't want to recommend that's considered?
No, I think you're right.
Excellent. So that will be recommendation 2. The next one is I think we need to enforce contracts. One of the big things that shocked me is to find that we have a contract that says we should be receiving open book accounting and 5%, and that hasn't happened. I know we have a preferred procurement options quite often with companies and people that have followed our processes, and we go, these are great, they're on our preferred procurement list and options. I think we should very much look at what happens when a company does not follow our contracts. Do we enforce the contracts, and do we have a system to remove them from preferred procurement if they are not following and maintaining contracts? Because if there's a stick, if there's a carrot, there has to be a stick, is the way I say it. Councillor Lilly, what's your view on that?
I agree. Can we also add something in there around ensuring that ward members are properly kept up to date and informed when decisions like this are made? Because I'm quite parochial about my ward and a bit controlling, and I think that's what we're here to do. And I think I would have been fuming if I'd have been in the situation of many East Dorset councillors of not finding out till this sort of period.
Councillor Leary has very astutely mentioned my point 6 on here, is that I think as councillors, the last thing we ever want, and actually something that Ray taught me, was we don't want surprises. If there's bad news, we want to know bad news and potential changes as soon as possible. And I think that's a plea to look at the local member protocol again, because there was a very strong local member protocol previously, and now there doesn't seem to be. And I think that a recommendation with that was to re-look at local member protocol. And I know it was only 2 months, but I think it'd be nice to look at that again. Sorry, 3 weeks. The date's earlier, 28th of November until mid-January. Oh, yeah. And to be fair, so to be clear, because that wasn't on the microphone, the Cabinet Member John Andrews has been very clear that within 3 weeks of him knowing, the local members knew. However, there was a 3-week delay almost between staff knowing and you knowing. And so I think officers knowing and you knowing. And so I think the point is there, and I think it's very clear from the Cabinet Member that he's very happy with the local member protocol. And actually, I was referring about it in other areas, not your own, John. I know you would tell me. Then we have, is everyone happy? Anyone against that as idea? No, fantastic. Happy with that. So the next one is number 4. If we purchase an asset, there should be careful consideration of what we do with that asset if it's freed up. Because it seems to me like there's been a bit of a knee-jerk, put them where they could be useful, as opposed to really thinking about how we can best use that asset that we purchased for the benefit of the widest group of people in Dorset. Everyone happy with that as a recommendation? Brilliant. And then the final one that I've noted down is the Plan B idea. When we know that a contract or a particular break point is coming up, to start working up a Plan B just in case. Because this is a good example of businesses are very different to local government, and businesses keep their cards close to their chest because it's quite beneficial to do so. So in this situation, we had very little forewarning. And so it's worth us thinking about that in the future, what we can learn about developing a Plan B. Is anyone against that as an idea? Any officers saying, no, you're massively overstating, please don't ask us and recommend these things? Anyone have anything else they wanted to add as recommendations on this specific item? Oh, yep, please do go for it.
That on the recommendation, anything to do with active travel or similar, there should be consultation with the tags or information to them so that you widen the level of opinion, information, that sort of thing.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So the last one would be that we engage with tags, and I think we'll get tags and stakeholders as soon as, because not everywhere has tags, there are other stakeholders in it. Everyone happy with that? Fantastic. So I think that's that item finished. And that was a really odd one because we were scrutinising something that actually was put in place in this situation by Ray, and I also helped out with it. And so was quite close to it. So thank you all for everything you added to that. And Chris, thank you for all of the work you do. This isn't ever personal. It's about looking at what's happened and what we can learn from it in the future. Same for you, Jack. You know, you run great teams. And everyone, so thank you. And thank you for time coming in today. And I really appreciate it. And I know it's a pain coming in person, but it makes such a difference for me to be able to see, lip read and hear. And it's such a different conversation that way. So thank you. You're welcome to stay or quietly move away. That's up to you guys. Thank you. We will now move to item 7, the Place and Resources Scrutiny Community Work Programme. So there's a couple of very quick things we're going to do, and then a slightly longer piece, but hopefully we won't be here too long. We have a couple of suggestions for things to add to the future committee work programme, and I think at this stage, rather than putting dates necessarily, we're going to take, Anthony will take them away, then we'll work up where they can fit into the work programme. So I'm going to come in order that people made me aware that they want to make suggestions, and the first is Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. Because of what we've just been through, I've added another one. Sorry about this. But in early 2024, I asked about an update to Hedge, which has been my passion for over 4 years. Unfortunately, Jan's left us because it was him that said to me that due to the proximity of the election, Just to remind people, that was May 2024. He felt that it would be better left until after the election, and June was mentioned. And I'm sure he meant June 24, not June 2030. Because, John, if you get the same treatment on this, it's going to get kicked down the road forever. And you and I both feel the same on this, and that's the review has to take place. One other one I would like to add, because of what we've just been through on Beryl bikes, we have a similar situation on our EV charging stations. So I think that's something else that we should bring to scrutiny to get an update as to where we are, because again, there is a link in there that gives us a profit coming back. If we're not getting the profit, then the question has to be asked, do we get the information from that supplier? I'm not going to name them tonight. I know who they are. From that supplier, as against the information we're not getting from Beryl's left us, from Beryl. I was just about to give him a nudge. It might help him if he got the paperwork into us fairly quickly. But I'm sure Jonathan will be making a note that there's a contract. Yeah, both are. Yeah, procurement as well. Sorry, Aidan. I wasn't deliberately missing you out, I promise. But I do think we need to look at the e-charging stations, because every time I come here, there's nobody on the e-charging stations, and yet we gave up 3 parking spaces that are revenue. 5 parkings, yeah. But these are the sort of things that a scrutiny we need to really dig in on now and try and resolve it. So number 1 is hedge to hedge. Number 2 is the EV charging station contract.
Jonathan, before you come in, I just want to, John, sorry, before you come in, I will let you in very shortly, because it is specifically related to your areas. With hedge to hedge, for those of us that are newer to the council, right at the start of the formation of Dorset Council, within the first year or so, we had a really good idea of looking at roads as a whole service approach. And we're calling it, at that time it was edge to edge, verge to verge, and then another officer got involved and changed it to hedge to verge, and it changed a few times. And so that policy, I think it'd be really good to see the policy and the strategy of that review and its outcomes and the learning that's happened so far. And so just for those that aren't aware of it, because I know it has been ongoing since, I believe it really started when, I think Karen Punchard was the director at the time. Correct. And so that was quite a while ago now, so I'm sure there will be an update. John.
I keep it close to me all the time, Ray, hedge to hedge, because I was only talking about it to Jack and Emma and Gemma this morning. So, yes, we haven't gone very far with it, I have to say. I've had a suggestion, Chair, if you ask me to allow me to intervene. Councillor Bartlett is requesting that we have a place and resources scrutiny on the audit, on the audio within this room, because it's unfair, it is unfair to people that are legitimately rung into the hybrid screen that they can't have their say, including Beryl, who were on here. So they were getting criticised, they weren't having any callback. So I think that is real valid, because I struggle to hear. So I'm totally in tune with what you say, or maybe not, depending on whether you're on there or not over here. But that needs to go on the forward plan.
I want to make it clear, I've been saying this almost since the moment we got started in this chamber after leaving the amazingly set up and very amazingly working South Walks House, which was fantastic for these kinds of meetings. And I'm hoping it's something that I have been told previously that Property Services are looking into it. They can turn it up, but I think a lot of the issues is the people, the other ends, microphones and quality of their stuff as well. And I also think that when it is scrutiny, you need to be able to see someone's body language, because that's part of the question, the answering of the question. And so I would stick to, for purposes of scrutiny, the effort should always be to be in the room. However, if there's a problem and you can't, then we need to make allowances and try to help with that. So I sort of agree with you halfway there, which is why I try to give every possible courtesy I could to Councillor Bartlett today. But it'd be really unfair for Bell Bikes to speak when actually we can't hear their responses. It'd be shocking. Councillor Bryan, you wanted to come back on something?
Yeah, I just want to raise some clarity on that, John, because it was only tonight we were informed that Beryl Bikes weren't attending. This has been set up with Beryl attending. The circumstances that happened that may have changed it, but we did ask Beryl Bike to attend because this is something that is quite important to the people of Dorset. That's why we needed them here. But unfortunately, and my hearing's fine, but I couldn't hear half of what Shane was saying. And it's unusual for Shane. He attends every meeting. He's probably one of the best attendants that we have. And he'll be gutted he couldn't be here, but at least he was online. But I do think it's strange that we haven't done something about the acoustics in here, even if there was a speaker facing in this direction, because normally the screens face that way, away, and we have the benefit of the screen here, but during normal times, they get turned that way, and you can probably hear better at the back than we can at the front.
So we're getting well off the point here. I'm going to put it back on. I'm sorry, guys. Anyone that has problems with the audio in here, just keep complaining about it, and that's one of the reasons that I stick so much to, if you're not in the room, you can't speak. I can't hear, I'm not being disenfranchised. You've got to be in the room if you want to speak. And it also means that we should look at the disabled access in here, because that is frankly appalling as well, and I'm surprised we're allowed to have it this way. But moving to items of the forward plan, we are putting on there a request for hedge to hedge as an update to come to us, and we're putting on there the e-charging, and so the e-charging for that. With all of these things we're putting on, what will happen, and I know there's 2 more suggestions at least, Anthony will organise probably a sub-meeting for us away from here, where we can then work out key lines of inquiry, where if you are interested in that item and know you have lines of inquiry you specifically want, I would ask you to come to that so we can start developing those to make sure the right information and the right officers are in the room afterwards. So that's something we'll start doing as we add new, more specific things in there. Next person I have is Alex Brenton, and then I do have you, Louis.
Councillor Brenton, Litchett and Upton. I have concerns that going back a while, we have made quite a fuss about connecting Dorset and increasing IT and Wi-Fi and cable and fibre throughout Dorset. I know people who live in towns are all connected up beautifully, but there's still quite a lot of semi-rurals and really rural who are in terrible IT conditions. We know that when people try to listen in and they try to talk. We know that when we're trying to, keep up at home about some meeting. And in my patch, I know of a village where 1/3 has no chance of getting cable. That's ridiculous. There was the government scheme, there was the Dorset push for IT connections everywhere. We were talking about bringing 4G everywhere. It doesn't. So could we investigate that somehow? It's a different areas, and I know it's not all Dorset putting it out, but it would be useful to have a breakdown of what companies and where they've gone and which bits need an extra push. And if we have to do the push, we would need to know where.
Fantastic, thank you. I think I can see a lot of people nodding, so I'm not going to argue. I think we put a lot of money in at one point with Digital Dorset, and so I think we could look at the goals for that, what the criteria was, what the outcome has been, and how much it cost. So I'm sure I leave that to Anthony to kind of delve into who's the best person to come in for that, because I know those teams have changed repeatedly. So yeah, thank you very much. Councillor O'Leary, you wanted to add something as well?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Coming on from the barrel bite discussion, I would like to see some scrutiny over the value for money we have actually got from our active transport schemes currently. If that's something we could scrutinise in the future about in terms of I know not all of it is taxpayer money, some of it, well, it is, sorry, Dorset taxpayer money, a lot of it's come from central government funding. I would be interested to see what sort of return we're getting on our investment as well in terms of the number of people using it to the amount of money spent. And in regard to this chamber, the chamber's built like this. It was built at a time when people were a bit more civilised and there was great decorum.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leary. I think from that, the idea is, and it's already come up a couple of times, is the active travel and transport. So there's two sides of active travel. People in health would be looking at the health benefits that come as a result of that active travel. But when it comes to the capital expenditure and usage, that is something we could look at in the future, because that is something to think about, actually. And so can you leave that with us to explore how we could go about it? Andy, do you want to say something on that one?
Yeah. So active travel have been through overview earlier this year and are coming back to July overview with the new active travel plan post-consultation. So they're in consultation at the moment for the new active travel plan.
You do wonder who they're consulting with, as we're also aware of that, don't you? And so I think, so in fact, what we're being told, Louis, is that plan is going there. However, what we could scrutinise is what we've spent on active travel and the usage of the current network. I believe that's part of it. Yeah, happy with that? And that would fall within our remit. So we've added a few things to it. Unless anyone wants to urgently add something else, can we now move to this, which is, this is a scoping exercise where whenever we have something come to scrutiny, in theory, we like to have lines of inquiry beforehand, where we set out rough ideas of what we want to look into and the bits we want to particularly focus on. The item coming, I believe, next month or the month after is the whole budget setting process of Dorset Council. It came to my attention when we were doing the budget setting this year. I asked for what I thought was a really simple thing. I asked for what we budgeted for at the start of the year, what we spent. What we budgeted for, what we spent for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, so we could just see, what we're budgeting for, roughly what we spent. I thought that would be a really simple, easy thing. It didn't exist. It was something they couldn't get access to, and almost had to delay the budget meeting because it wasn't going to be provided. Luckily, Sean Kramer managed to provide a version of it, which is what we saw in our budget meeting this year. And that made me realise that actually, I'm not sure I understand how the budget is set within the council. And it was something that a lot of us spoke about, and no one seems really clear on exactly that process of how it's set. So today, Aidan's going to talk us through a very brief overview of how that budget is set. It's not questions. We're not questioning him on any of it. We can ask questions for clarity. And that's to help us decide which parts we want to be more informed about and which parts we think need scrutinising, or that none of it needs scrutinising. Okay, so is everyone kind of clear on that? But we're not doing questions on budget areas or having suggestions on what should happen. Yeah? Fantastic. Aidan, you happy with that? Super, got thumbs up.
Good evening, everybody. So Aidan Dunn, Executive Director for Corporate Development and Chief Finance Officer. Can I ask, Lindsay, are you able to upload my presentation? It won't allow me to access it directly. So if you could helpfully sort of upload that, that'd be really helpful. So I'm just going to run through a quick set of slides to give you the overview of the budget setting process. And in particular, I want the steer I've been given by the chair is it's not about the political process, it's about the mechanics of the budget setting process. So I'm going to canter through quite quickly. 4 areas in particular on the next slide that I want to touch on. So the budget planning time horizon, the timetable that we go through on the annual budget setting process, the approach, as the chairman has just outlined, and in particular, our really material variables. How do we predict what we're going to spend, the demand elements? Now, I'm conscious that those of you that have been with Dorset Council sort of since the beginning will have seen a number of these slides before, because the budget setting process is the one we've used for the last 6 years. But it's a real opportunity to draw out some of the key points. And many of these slides have been in the budget cafes as well, so it might be familiar. So if I'm going over old ground, I do apologise, but I think it would be helpful to frame the conversation. So the first question, what's the time horizon for our budget planning process? If we move on to the next slide, I'm not expecting you to see and digest the numbers, but this is the medium-term financial plan that shows that we model our budget assumptions over a 5-year period. So we try and not look just next year. We try and plan our resources on a 5-year period in terms of what we share publicly. And frankly, behind the scenes, we've extended this schedule up for 10 years. I think the couple of important points to draw out on this. One of the things that does hamper us, government funding is allocated on an annual basis rather than a 3-year or a 5-year basis. So there is a degree of inevitable staccato as the government policies change and the way our funding comes through. But also this, you can see the red line, the bottom red line shows our budget gap. Whilst we've had a balanced budget last year, we've got a balanced budget for this year. The pressures that we're seeing in Dorset and across local government show there is a budget gap over the next 3-4 years beyond that. So we plan on a long-term basis, but the detail for the annual budget is done on an annual basis. So that's my first point. The next slide talks about a broad brush budget planning cycle for the annual part of the cycle. So at the moment, in the spring and as we're entering the summer, we as officers, this is the finance team, it's senior leadership team, the corporate leadership team, so officers and the finance team in particular, we're reviewing the assumptions that you've seen in that medium-term financial plan. We're also asking, understanding, starting to scope out sort of the new ideas that are either coming through national policy or indeed local policy. But we're also recognising additional pressures and those coming through. So that could be inflation coming up, inflation going down. It could be the pressures as a consequence of demand growing. So already, even though we're only sort of in the first month of the new financial year, we're already starting to do our thinking about next year's budget. So that's a predominantly officer-based activity during the spring and summer. But in September, the information starts to come into the political space. So we have the political process. We have there'll be cabinet meetings, member briefings. Informal cabinet will be looking at budget assumptions around in September. And this leads us into typically October. I'll pause for a second.
Thank you very much, Aidan. And yeah, a lot of this is from that. What we're looking at today is just, I guess, from what you've got there, is just that spring-summer. It's what is that? Because the rest of it, we understand we're involved in. It's that whole part that we don't. And that's what I'm kind of hoping you're going to go into more. That's the bit we're looking at.
And are you saying that that's what you want me to talk about now or in a scrutiny paper in the future?
Sorry, that was the bit I wanted the overview on, is the officer part of it, because we knew the political. It's an overview of what that is. And if that's not, if you want to do that at a full thing as a paper, it was that overview that I was hoping for. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear from our conversation.
Okay, I'll give you a quick flavour of the sort of things that we're doing at the moment. So, in fact, if I move on one slide and then I'll come back, I think that's probably the easiest. Move on another slide, if we may. So, the fundamental budget process, and this is last year's slide, hence the dates. So the starting point for any budget process is, the starting point for next year's budget is this year's budget. So we start at this year's budget. As we go through the course of the year, we're monitoring spend and indeed underspends and overspends. And so we have to establish how much of that is just one-off and how much of it is recurrent. So if we're overspending on a certain budget throughout the year and we know there's nothing we can do about it, we need to build that into next year's budget. So that's the spend pressures from in year. The third line is new spend pressures for the next financial year. So that might be, as a consequence of national policy, and we know, for example, government policy around waste collection, waste disposal is changing. That might cost us more. We have to put an estimate of what that will cost, build that into our budget assumptions. And similarly, sort of pressures around, say, for example, if staffing is increasing or staffing costs through pay awards, we have to build those in as well. But also, the next line about savings, initial savings, sorry, not the next slide, the next line, thanks, Lindsay. So initial savings, so what we're modelling at this point is we constantly keep the organisation under pressure, asking for opportunities to identify savings and asking our budget holders to deliver those savings. So we build those in as well. So that's kind of the mechanics of what's going on, but also other big variables that we're looking at. Yep.
So you say those are the mechanics. To me, no, those are the outcomes. What we want to scrutinise is the mechanics. How do those initial savings come about? How do we predict the recurrent spend? And is it just based on 1 year previously? How do we predict new spend pressures? It's the mechanics of the actual back office side that we want to scrutinise and understand and look into. What this is this is just the political and the actual sign-off process it goes through. And I think we're all very aware of that. It's the actual mechanics behind it that we want to look into. Does that make sense?
It does. Can I just check all, if I may, through you, Chair, check that all other members, I'll move on from this slide if you want, but I'm conscious that we're trying to scope something, so if members want a bit more detail, I'm happy to talk, otherwise I'll move on.
Yeah, Councillor Alex, Brenton, go for it.
This is very interesting, but the bit that baffles me when I look at budgets is how do you know that this is the right amount for children's services? How do you know this is the right amount for transport? Or do you just look at what they've had, what you gave them last year, and say they need another 5% or whatever it is? Because it also comes down to how do they, I mean, you say that they have to identify savings. So what are they looking at? I mean, and is there I mean, it always seems a bit suspicious that there's an element of, we will not, oh no, we'll save 5% off that. Oh, we'll do this. How did they actually come to that decision? I mean, coming from a very basic town and parish council budgets, you know what things are going to cost because you've bought it last year. These figures are so huge that it's very difficult for somebody like me to go, well, that sounds a reasonable amount of money.
And that's exactly the point that I was trying to make with Aidan, why I asked Aidan not to present this, but to go into the mechanics behind it, because that's the bit. Is how do those assumptions get created? How do those the plans? How do we do that side to it? So okay, that seems about the same. Louis, you had a point as well on this.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as this is obviously not an item that is up for scrutiny tonight, I think it would be unfair to the officer to scrutinise this tonight because we aren't possessed with the full facts. And it would be unfair on us to try and scrutinise something I haven't read yet. So therefore, may I just suggest that we finish this now and the officer is given a clear indication of what it is that you, as the chairman, as the person who's directing this, is the issue that they wish to scrutinise and which we are agreed to, I assume. I don't mean to speak on behalf of the committee. Go away and he is given the brief there to come back for the next scrutiny or whenever that is scheduled in.
And Louis, ironically, that's exactly what we're trying to do now. The idea was, and this is what we discussed previously and with Anthony, the idea was that there would be enough of an overview of how those estimations, are they just guesses, happen, or so we can work out which bits we want to then scrutinise and go into. Because if Aidan says it's just based on last year's plus 5%, well then actually we can't really scrutinise that, there's no point in doing it. But if it is like there's a really complex metric on way we do it, then actually that's something we might want to look into and find out more. And that was the idea of this scoping exercise. And that's why we can't ask questions as such, because that wouldn't be fair, because Aidan hasn't time. The idea here is to find the scoping for it. Not a member of the committee, but is it particularly pertinent?
for you to decide. Steve Robinson, Litchfield and Upton, but also Cabinet for Adult Social Care. In terms of the budget for adult social care, sometimes it might be useful actually to talk to the executive director rather than the finance director for how some of the figures are presented to that department. Within adult social care, we know we have X many...
I'm cutting you off there because we're not scrutinising it tonight, and we're scrutinising the process it goes through, which isn't down to cabinet members or executive directors of those areas. It's the process upon which we create the budget, purely finance. Yeah, purely finance. We're not going to all the different directorates because that'd be a nightmare because every directorate does it differently. We're going for the wholesale standard finance side. Basically, what in my head the magicians Aidan and Sean do to make sure we're safe, legal, and transparent. And it's that side to it, I think. Or are they kept totally separately, Aidan?
If I can keep going, I think I might get towards where you'd like to go. So, one of the key how do we predict the future? So one of the key factors is around inflation, because inflation determines how much our contracts go up by, but also inevitably pay is linked to inflation. This is one of the key variables in year. So we have to rely on the experts. So just a little chart here. So this is the Bank of England's monetary policy report giving an estimate of inflation. We know how volatile it's been. So this is an example of an area where we as a council or as a chief finance officer, I have to give an estimate of what I think inflation will be for the next year. And so one of your key questions, how do you decide inflation? We'd use the best evidence we've got and take a judgment. We move on to the next slide. So the largest area we spend money on is adult social care. And as we know, driven by the demographics of Dorset, driven by an increase in demand. What this chart says, I'll just sort of quickly paint the picture. So the upper line shows since 2021 the cost of providing adult social care and the projection of if we do nothing, if we didn't make our policy changes, if we didn't do our early intervention, if we didn't do preventative services, it shows what the costs could have been had we done nothing. The second line down, the black line, describes the action that we've taken and our estimate of costs coming out based on some modelling we'd done sort of later on in the process. And the third line, the purple one that goes into dots, is the actual spend we've incurred based on our policies and up to date, and that's obviously better than doing nothing. And then we've done a projection based on our policies, based on the investments we've made, of how much adult social care will cost next year and the year after. So it's based on this analysis, and as you can imagine, there's thousands of spreadsheets behind this, but based on this analysis that we determine or assess what the cost of adult social care will be next year. So that's a flavour. We move on to the next one, Lindsay. So children's social care is the next area of really significant spend. Key drivers for that, the number of children in care, the type of care they receive, and the unit price of when we buy it. So we need to make a prediction on each of those three areas. We move on to the next slide. You might be familiar with this. This shows our history, and you can see the impact of changes in government policy, but also changes of local policy. So once again, we've got a predictive model that assesses those three variables, and we set a budget accordingly. I move on to the third variable that I'd like to cover, home to school transport on the next slide. Lindsay, thank you. Home to school transport has been an area of considerable growth over the last few years. So our budget in 2021 was 22 million. Our budget at the moment, or forecast spend for 24-25 was sort of 16 million pounds more. So a real increase. Factors that were driving that, cost of fuel, cost of inflation, pay awards to the drivers, as well as the state of the competitive market. So once again, we do an analysis of all of those areas and use that to make the best assessment of how much we need more next year than we do this year. So there's some real sort of plus driven by the number of children as well, a changing headcount and role of schools. So I just wanted to give you three examples there of how we use data and history to drive predictions in the future. Okay, I'll stop.
I think, again, we're at the outcome. What we're looking at is, how did you predict that? Because you say you use modelling software, or modelling. Is that a modelling software? Is that a person making their own guesses? How? It's that actual background. This is still very high level, and we're not looking at that. It's the actual, how do we model it? How do we predict it? Because, as you know, homeschool transport is a great example you used. That's the budget increasing, but actually the spend has not increased by the same amount. We were budgeting lower than the actual spend was for decades. And so for homeschool transport specifically. And so how are we making those predictions? Because we very rarely have to rebase budgets, because rebasing is different entirely. How do we make that modelling? What is that modelling? What does that consist of?
So just to clarify, the bar chart on the bottom left, that's spend rather than budget, so it's increased costs over the years. And so I'm describing a combination of officer judgment, analysis, history, and we have to make our best assessment. So all of these factors come together. So my point is, I've tried to give you an overview of some of the thinking behind, and rather than spend a lot of time writing a report that doesn't meet your needs, what I'm trying to get is lines of inquiry that, as a scrutiny committee, you can give me a steer on, so that I don't waste your time and indeed my time as well. And finally, final slide, Lindsay, just to put this into context about the complexity of this organisation, we do spend over £1 billion every year. We've got, we were talking about one of our suppliers earlier, we've got 1,000 suppliers, probably around 200 or 2,000 different contracts as well. And this is just the revenue budget. We've got the capital budget on top of that, and then we've got a £4 billion pension fund. So there is a huge degree of complexity here. So I think if you can zero in on what you want to scrutinise, I think we'd all find that beneficial.
Okay, so I'm aware this is taking a long time, and that wasn't quite what I was thinking would happen today. So I think what would really help is if we start, as a good ballpark starter for 10, is talk us through a process as an example. If we start, and let's take something completely benign and unusual, let's look at, let's look at fuel. How much fuel we're going to spend on fuel over the year? Because obviously we have to predict what we're going to spend on fuel over the whole year, and at some point there'll be a simulation of modelling. I don't know if that modelling is people sat talking or what that is. Talk us from start to process how we work out how much we are going to budget to spend on fuel in the next year. Yeah, and that way you can take us right from the very start of however you start the process. So still have no idea how that internal side works. And it's that internal side we want to understand more. And so if we use that as an example, we can start with that, and then hopefully that can be extrapolated to other services and other items. Or do you think there's a better example to take than fuel? I'm trying to take something very simple because it's not big picture. That's not what we're looking to scrutinise.
Thanks. So as part of the scope, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Or so if you knew and understood perfectly how we predicted fuel costs, what do you want to do with that?
Super. No, I thank you for the pushbacks. The whole point of scrutiny is to add value. The point I'm really getting to is at the moment, we are given lots of numbers of the budget with overall headline figures. And when it's overall headline figures, we just accept it and nod it off. Generally, we scrutinise certain parts of it at a very surface level and at the high level and just the big ticket items. What we don't actually scrutinise is the efficacy of our budgeting. And I am very aware that, in my opinion, our budgets, although we come out balanced and it all works out in the end, there's a huge amount of not rob people to pay Paul, but make a saving here to cover an overspend there. And what I'm looking for is to have confidence in our modelling and budgeting ability on items to make sure that actually we are modelling, we're using the correct software and the right ways of doing it, so it is as accurate as possible, from realising that actually there are some massive variables like parking, I know that is one, but so we can try to reduce the risk of being in situations where, I don't know, hypothetically, we have to arbitrarily not have a policy for, but choose to keep vacancies empty for 6 months to make in-year savings because someone else has actually spent more than we thought. And so it's trying to look at those areas. But we have no idea what those areas are because they're not really presented to us. And so if we can't look at those areas specifically, we can look at the process that creates them, was the idea that I was looking for. And when I was talking to other councillors and elected people about how the budget actually is created, not our sign-off part, not the big overall figures, the smaller area, no one understood it. And if we don't understand it and can't explain it to each other, then it's very hard for us to, one, believe in it, and two, scrutinise it. Although, being very clear, we have come in very well on budget and have set balanced budgets the whole way through, so it's no criticism of what the outcomes are. It's understanding the process that gets us to it, and actually that nitty-gritty side, which isn't ever covered to us. Does that make sense, Aidan?
It does, but I forgive me for trying to. I just want to get clarity on the scoping of this. So, in terms of looking at over and under spends, which is your point. So, there's something about, is the budget set accurately? Is the budget set? So we could overspend because the budget was set inaccurately. That could be the argument. Yeah. So that gets the audit committee look at over and under spends, and as part of their quarterly review of that. So I'm kind of just trying not to duplicate the pieces of work that need to be done.
So, Aidan, I think it's really clear. I'm going to draw this to a halt because we need to move on. What we would like to see is how you actually model the budget. You say modelling. Could you please explain and talk us through a level of modelling of how modelling works at the future appropriate meeting? We don't need to go into it now and drawing it to an end. But what we want is how you actually model each lower level number, not the big overall numbers. If you need any more clear stuff on that, I'm happy to meet with you separately and take it off there. But we're talking about in circles, and we are not trying to look at the actual auditing what the financials are. But I'm very aware there's a lot of pushback from us looking into this, which makes me want to look into it a hell of a lot more. And so I think we'll leave it at there. We will move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Aidan, for that. Oh, sorry, you want to come back?
No, I'm sorry, this came across as pushback. That's not. I'm just, this, as I've described, this is a hugely complex area. I just need precision so that I don't waste your time. So it's not pushback, I'm seeking clarity.
Aidan, thank you. And to be clear, that's exactly what this scoping session was meant to be, that you could give us an overview of that more level detail, not what we already knew. And so we could scope, because we can't tell you what we don't know. We can't give you lines of inquiry into something we have no idea how it works. And we'll take it off and away from here. Louis, is this to agree with what I've just said? Yep.
Sorry. Yeah, would this not be something perhaps for joint scrutiny, bearing in mind that this would cover both us and people in health in terms of they're both affected by this, instead of if we do it and then they think, oh, that'd be handy for us, instead of doing it, we could do it jointly perhaps.
Absolutely, very happy to look into that in the future. This was literally a recommendation to look into the actual budget setting process, which is more resource and policy than actual people. That's the outcomes. And it was one of those that I thought this would be very different to how it was. There's been a lot of pushback on this the whole way through, getting it here to even to this today. And I will stand and say pushback, and I'm happy to go further if necessary. Aidan, please do.
Thank you. I'll just reiterate, my role as an officer is to support committees, support all members. I just, based on the conversation we had, this is a presentation I thought you'd asked for, so I'd clearly misunderstood that. What I don't want to do is to commission my team to do a lengthy piece of work based on a misunderstanding. So all I'm asking for is clarity. I'm not being obstructive. The budget setting process is hugely complex. We spent a lot of time. I want to get it right. And if the committee can add value to that, then that'd be super. I'm not resisting. I'm seeking clarity.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to hear that. That is the way we should be working. That's a good thing. So thank you very much for doing that. And I am very easily misunderstood. I'm not always the clearest, so I can understand how that could happen. It could be on either side. We're now going to move on, I think.
Can I just raise one point?
What, okay, yep.
For new members, I'm going to give you one example where things went drastically wrong. In the old Dorset County Council days, they decided to stop the gully cleaning. Saved us about £180,000 a year. Because of the damage it did to the roads, it cost us £2 million a year for that decision. That's something I had to work with, but it's still happening now, which is why I asked for the hedge-to-hedge. And I think it's so important that we understand where we've come from, and then we can point Aidan in the right direction as to the sort of detail we want to look at. Because if there's a saving there that has a consequence of a larger cost there, we need to identify that very early in the budget setting process. Thank you for your...
Fantastic. So we'll move to item 8 on the agenda, which is the executive arrangement and forward plans. We are on there. It's all listed as it is. Anything anyone wants to comment on? Item 9, urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 10, exempt business. There is no exempt business. Meeting closed. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.